Hello, I am D.
I am R.
I am V.
I'm G.
I'm J.
Okay, and today we're going to be covering one of the most fundamental aspects, some would say, knowledge, more specifically epistemology, or the theory and study of knowledge. There's a lot of questions surrounding it, but I think that one that we all can agree is a fundamental aspect of examining knowledge is, can knowledge ever truly be objective? Or more specifically, do you think we'd all be able to know if something is real? Can we agree on it? What do you guys think?
I'd say knowledge can be objective. For example, we know that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. That's just objective fact. But the way we get there can be subjective.
What do you guys think the best way to get to a certain knowledgeable point is?
I don't think you can ever truly 100% get to a knowledgeable point, because the point of science, which is the most objective knowledge we have, is it's constantly evolving. As new theories and evidences arise, you have to change your opinions to suit the facts, not the other way around.
Because we know Descartes, he actually rejected empiricism, or a study of rational observation, because he thought our senses could be fooled, so we should throw that out of the window. I think he used logical reasoning only, and it actually did lead him to some false points. But I think logical reasoning could also be a point as well. What do you guys think of that? Well, I think one example that we know about knowledge is what some people call the justified true belief. The justified true belief was a system that some people thought of a while back in order to think about what do we know to be true? How can we best verify it? So the way they defined knowledge was there are 3 components to knowledge. First is the thing you believe in has to actually be true. For example, let's say 1 + 1 = 2. It actually has to be true. Obviously, if it's not true, then we can't know that it's true or not. Then we have to actually be able to verify it. We have to be able to prove 1 + 1 = 2, and we also have to observe. We have to actually know about it, or the fact that if we don't even know about 1 + 1 = 2, then we can't really know. We don't have knowledge about it.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know.
I think that leads well into the cow in the field experiment.
Yeah. Oh, so the cow in the field experiment was actually a counterpoint designed against the justified knowledge theorem, because so the story kind of goes like this. There was a farmer who had a cow, and he loved this cow very much, but one day he thought he lost his cow. So he asked his milkmaid, "Do you know where my cow is?" And she said, "Yes, the cow is over there in the field." Hence the cow in the field experiment. So he went over there. He thought he saw the cow. He sees a black and white shape in the distance, and he says, "Oh yeah, that's my cow over there." So he goes back, and he thinks everything's good. But later that day, he goes back into the field. He's trying to get his cow, and he realizes, yes, his cow was in the field, but
Not where he thought it was.
It was actually behind some trees. What he thought he saw the cow was actually a sheet of black and white paper floating in the wind. So then the question is, well, he observed the cow, right? He thought he saw the cow. He verified his belief that the cow was there. The cow was there, that's true. But the question becomes, did he know that the cow was there?
I think from his observable reality, he knew that the cow was there, because one test shows, or I don't know what university this was from, but the test actually shows that they hooked up these runners to an MRI, or they just hooked them up. They looked at their brain, they kind of scanned their brain and just took a look at it, having them visualize them in that moment of running. And then they did the same thing to actual runners, and what they were able to find was that the same parts of the brain were lighting up, and so it's as if their objective realities were the same.
That's interesting. Well, for me, I would say no, because even though he thought he knew where the cow was, he didn't actually bother to go up there and check if the cow was actually there.
But he saw that his verification was looking in the distance, and he thought he saw the.
Well, the cow wasn't actually where he thought it would be, so that's still false.
I don't think he had a big enough sample size of verification to be able to check to see if that's true or not.
He should have checked 3 times, recorded his responses.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, I think verification of knowledge is probably the weakest step, right?
Well, is there a difference between belief and knowledge? He believed the cow was there.
Yeah.
And if we define a belief as knowledge without evidence, as separate from knowledge, which is something that's known with evidence, then did he believe the cow was there, and the belief might be right or it might be wrong to be verified later.
But I don't think that this was a belief necessarily, because there was evidence for this. He went, he checked, and he saw what he presumed to be a cow. So this was, in this case, knowledge, not a belief.
Well,
But it was knowledge without evidence. It was knowledge based on
Singular
bad
evidence.
False
Yeah,
evidence.
that's-
False
I think we would
evidence.
have to break it down to that. Depending on how much evidence you have and whether or not it's verifiable, goes down to quantity.
Quantity.
Yeah.
Not about quality.
Yeah.
Well, quality, yes, but you.
Well, those
you
are two different measures of legitimacy.
he was missing both quality and quantity. So
Well, didn't his original knowledge stem from the maid telling him that it was in the field?
Right. So that's why he went there to check for
To
himself.
verify it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he saw the shape of paper, which he thought was the cow.
But the verification
Verification
wasn't
wasn't-
true.
Yeah,
Right,
he had no
he
way to
didn't-
know it was actually there. He just believed it was there and saw something that like sided with his belief, even though it wasn't true necessarily.
So probably maybe the biggest step in being able to figure out if something is true or not. The hardest part isn't like whether or not it's actually true or not, because that's outside of our opinions. But the problem is us trying to verify it. How are we going to verify? What do you guys think? So obviously there's a lot of different ways to verify knowledge, and actually one of the most famous thought experiments that concerns obtaining knowledge is an experiment called Mary's Room. So let's imagine this. So essentially the question is asking whether or not experience is a valid form of adding knowledge. That's the question essentially. Mary's Room is trying to answer that. So let's imagine that there is a neuroscientist named Mary, and she is the foremost, best expert in color theory. Like she knows all the wavelengths, exactly what nanometer apart the red wavelengths are. She knows exactly what frontal cortex of the brain is going to light up. She knows everything there is about color. Like literally the foremost expert. Obviously this isn't possible, but this is a thought experiment. Let's imagine that she has gotten to this ultimate state of enlightenment. But one problem though is that she has actually never seen color. She is actually colorblind. So that's the thing. She is a color scientist who is colorblind. And the worst is that she lives in a black and white room where the room is all black and white. The lighting is very stark, so there's no shade of color whatsoever. So she's really only seeing black and white. And her computer screen is in black and white as well, so she's only seen shades of black and white, monochrome, no color. But let's say one day, all of a sudden her computer screen glitches, and she sees an apple in red. And let's say, for example, for some reason her color blindness didn't work in this case, and she actually experienced that color red. The question is, did she learn something new about the color red, despite being the foremost expert on color theory?
I mean, if you're going to talk about something, then you should have experienced it. So I would say yes. Experience does count as a new form of knowledge. Even though she did know the exact wavelengths, that doesn't account for actually seeing something.
So, gee, I think you touched on something there. It said something like an expert should have experience in what they're talking about. So,
Yes.
so if anything, experience is not only a form of knowledge, but it's almost a recommended form of knowledge that someone should have in order to be concerned to know about something.
But if she knew everything about color, then shouldn't she also know the experience?
Right, so that's actually one counterpoint a lot of people mentioned, that just being able to, if she really knew everything about color, that by definition would include a necessary knowledge of how it was going to affect her brain and how she was going to perceive it. So
just to rack our brains a little bit more, then let's say that one little part is missing, and then she's never experienced color physically, like never seen it. So that way we can continue the conversation. Because I feel like if that's just like a breaking point, it's not as fun. So let's keep it in.
just so she hasn't experienced it.
Yeah, she hasn't experienced it.
Well, I would argue that she didn't have all the knowledge she needed in the first place. So I guess we could then argue that experience is a form of knowledge if we're gonna say it like that. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I really don't think you can't get the actual experience from knowing something. Like, imagine if I knew exactly where there's this machine and it throws out a ball. I know exactly where the ball's gonna land. I know exactly how the ball goes and everything about what's gonna happen when I put my hand out. If I never put my hand out and let the ball land in my hand, I've never felt the.
But you
catching
knew where the
throw.
ball was.
But I've never, I can't say that I've ever caught a ball.
I see what you're saying. So the experience in itself counts.
As a new experience.
New experience, yeah. All right, so let's go on to one of the most famous works I would say, that explores a lot of epistemological fields. 1984, written by George Orwell in the 1940s, I think it was. For listeners out there who don't want to get spoiled on the story, we're going to try to stay light on the spoilers, but we're going to go more into the world building, not necessarily the plot of the story. One of the biggest things in 1984 that the main character, Winston Smith, has to go against is the government's official policy on knowledge. In that, essentially what they're saying is, if everyone agrees that it's true, it is true. And then the question is, well, is that true? Do you think knowledge is something that can be obtained independently, something that's objective and something that, like, even if a single person believes in it, it's true because it's true? Objective of our perceptions, or do you think knowledge is something that we need to look at others on and form opinions based on their opinions?
I think it has to do with usefulness.
Okay.
I definitely think if there's something that's going to be a little bit more useful in terms of just everyone believes in this certain thing,
Yeah.
it's really you deciding on whether you want to use the useful knowledge, whether or not that may be correct or not, or you want to use the actual knowledge that you know is to be true because of the evidence that you've seen. So
I think that for all intents and purposes, the knowledge that everyone else thinks is the truth might as well be the truth, even if it is not the objective truth. The reason I believe that is even if you know that something is objectively true, then there's no point in knowing it if no one else will believe you.
yeah, it's useless in a way. I think you should be an advocate for like your truth that you know is true, but at the same day to day, you're just gonna have to use the truth that everyone else believes in, just because you, as a member of society, you have to end up using that to get to go through your day to day. But that's definitely, like, in the long run, that's something that you would want to change, just from a personal standpoint.
Okay, I guess we could. Oh, sorry.
Well, if you do say everyone believes it's true, then it effectively does become knowledge. Because if you think about where knowledge comes from, it's not one person inventing a new idea. It's a lot of people, oftentimes very smart people, building on each other's ideas and exploring and creating new concepts.
But then that brings up the question, like, what happened in a time in history where we found and corrected knowledge that was false?
That was not necessarily knowledge, because, like, if it was knowledge in the sense that everyone believed it was true, it would never have been disproven. Because there was some people who believed it wasn't true. They banded together and they found a way to disprove it. That's what knowledge is, effectively.
So I guess a follow-up question to that could be, do you think history can be an objective string of events? Is there such a thing as an objective history? Is, I guess, what we're trying to answer right now. Just a bit of context with 1984, because we're kind of using the book as a launching point.
Yeah.
They kind of do this weird thing called doublethink, where they accept two contradictory ideas at the same time and still believe that they're both true, even when they're clearly opposing each other. For example, the citizens in 1984 believe A, history can definitely be changed, for sure. Right? If, for example, if everyone says, oh, America never won independence from Britain, we're all actually still British citizens today, then boom, that becomes a new fact. The citizens in 1984 believe that this is very possible. But two, they also believe at the same time that this has never been done to them before. They accept that this is a very real possibility that could very easily happen, but they also believe that it's never happened.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that all of us raised our eyebrows at that moment. We were like, whoa.
So, because we think about American history, and I think one we can bring up is Thanksgiving, which is getting a lot more scrutiny lately, as not necessarily being this happy thing where the Pilgrims and Native Americans all got together in this one miraculous moment.
No, it was just a natural harvest of the time.
Right. It was a lot less amazing than we've made it out to be.
Yeah.
Well, was that old version really history? It was not necessarily the events that happened. It was us adding our own spin on the events that happened.
And that had its own purpose, as in to create like united beliefs for Americans, just as like we researched before in AP European history, where what we learned is that the foundation of Germany, like when Germany was started, you know, they were bringing in a whole bunch of different stories so that the German people would have like a combined idea, and I think that's what the purpose of that is. So it wasn't necessarily true history, it was more like just a belief that the government was trying to like provide to the people, so that way, you know, they had this united sense of what it means to be like an American.
Then the question becomes, do you think that could become the new truth, or the new can that become objective knowledge, do you think?
No, I still think it would be considered subjective knowledge.
Even if everyone believed in it?
Well, like the thing with history is that it's written ultimately by people, and
Right.
people have certain personal beliefs and prejudices. So, can you really ever have objective history? Because it's going to be written by a person, and that person is evidently at some point going to reveal a bias in their writing.
Well, I think that ties back into like we all know the date of like when slavery ended. We all know the date of like when certain events happen, and events can be like objectively true. I would believe.
So I want to add on to that. I think yes, you can make a objective version, but A, it's gonna be very, very boring, and B, it's not gonna be very, very relevant.
Yeah.
Because it's only gonna have dates and like there's no even policies are gonna be very, very boring. It's just gonna be that legal.
And out of
writing.
that objective knowledge, you can pull out different subjective knowledges. Like if you look at like the moment that slavery was gone, you can look at different people's experiences, and they would argue that that was a good or a bad thing. That's the subjective part, but there's the ultimate objective part where slavery ended. So
if you made a completely objective version of history, wouldn't it essentially boil down to the numbers, like the effects of something, but you wouldn't basically at all go into the causes? Because you could always argue, oh, this caused this, no, this caused this. So you would effectively only be telling what happened. You wouldn't be able to analyze why it happened.
So some might argue then that knowledge might not just be objective, but in some cases you kind of want to put in a subjective to make that knowledge
analysis.
To make it useful, right?
And in
to
fact,
learn a
make
lesson.
that knowledge more complete then, if you're adding that analysis in with the evidence that you have. But what do you think? Should knowledge have that kind of extra bit added? Maybe a bit of subjectiveness, as long as you're aware of what that subjectiveness is and you're able to deal with it.
Well, what would the use of history be if it was just boiled down to like dates and names? Like, what could we learn from that if we didn't put people's ideas onto it? If we didn't put a subjective spin sometimes? Because that can teach us moral lessons about society.
you need to specify whether it's affecting the middle class, maybe if it's affecting upper classes, and it's doing all of that. So you really need that, I guess, if that's what you're trying to do, if you want that subjectiveness in history.
Cool. Well, I think that concludes this episode of the podcast, guys. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you again.